Hello and welcome to the third virtual talk in MISC Art Institute's 6-month series of conversations with leading industry experts. My name is Oliver Farrell. I am the Education Program Manager at MISC Art Institute, and I'm your host for this talk. What is contemporary art? Our speaker today is London-based curator, educator, and architect Gonzalo Herrero Delicado. Gonzalo's work explores issues around ecology and digital culture, examining these two worlds through the lens of design, architecture, and art. Today, we will be exploring how museums and artists are entering the metaverse and discussing some of the questions this important shift will pose for the future. Gonzalo works as a lecturer at Central St. Martin's in London, and he's the inaugural curator for the Museum of the Future, which opened last month in Dubai. Today's session will be recorded and we will upload the video to the MISC YouTube account. The first half of today's talk will be a presentation by Gonzalo, but attendees are invited to ask questions in the chat, and we will come to these questions in the second half of today's talk. Now I would like to welcome our speaker, Gonzalo Herrero Delicado.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, the MISC Art Institute, for inviting me to be part of the wonderful series. It is great that it's online, but it's also a pity that I didn't have the chance to visit Riyadh. Hopefully we can find another opportunity later on. Thank you also for inviting me to talk about this specific topic and what is this so-called thing called the metaverse, how it's gonna impact our lives and also the cultural sector. So I'm gonna share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. Can you see it?
Yep.
Can you see full screen?
Full screen.
Perfect. So yeah, the title for this exhibition is Curating for a Complex World. Right now it looks like the digital advance and like all these technological innovation that are surrounding us might make our work as curator more accessible to everyone, but it also comes with many other challenges that we, the people working in cultural production, we will need to understand first of all, and then knowing how to respond to it, so we can create experiences that can be relevant to everyone, and also taking in consideration the impact that they might have on the planet. I would like to start this lecture by referencing Karl Marx, who in 1884, he wrote his first manuscript as part of a series of manuscripts, the economic and philosophic manuscript called The Strained Labor. And in this manuscript, Karl Marx was analyzed the impact that capitalization and different technology that were transforming the way we industry and the production of goods, the goods was being developed, will have on the relationship that we have between us as a society, but also between us and the environment around us, and how those innovations that have a massive transformation on the economical sector come also like with pros and cons. And he defined in the Strained Labor 4 forms of alienation due to this increased capitalist society and the introduction of these new technologies that later on obviously have defined the Industrial Revolution. And these 4 forms of alienation were the alienation from ourselves, the alienation from other people, the alienation from work, and the alienation from nature. 4 forms of alienation that are incredibly important if we analyze them today, and we don't refer them to those specific technologies that he was referring to, but to many other technological innovations that are happening today. For example, like the fact that we are now like having this conversation on Zoom, it's really generating an alienation from other people. You know, often like this kind of event were only possible to happen in the physical world, where we will be like gathering together, having a conversation one-to-one, putting face to each other. And this is creating like this kind of making us invisible in a way, and like alienating ourselves from others and finding little ways to empathize with others, which has an impact beyond just the cultural sector. But it's also creating an alienation from nature. And these two types of alienation I'm going to refer to like during the lecture. And it is alienation from nature that we don't know yet, or to the degree that we should, what is the impact that technological innovation might come with, and what it will be the environmental impact that it has. So when we are putting all the promise of an optimistic future into those technologies, we need also to be aware of the environmental impact that can have. The thing is that technology has the power to transform our lives and the way we produce now, now that we are facing what many people call the fourth industrial revolution. And this is just an example, like 3D printing technology is expected to keep growing and multiply its benefits over the next year and over the next decade. But per se, the technology can be used in many different ways. It can be used for 3D printing organs in the future, or it can be used for 3D printing handguns, which it might come with like many challenges in the way of like democratizing these weapons for everyone. But it can also be used for 3D printing these structures by Alex Go that are included in the exhibition I opened at the Museum of the Future. These are 3D printed structures that can allow to regenerate the coral reefs in areas where climate change has had a massive impact, and acidification of water has deteriorated the coral reefs, and it can allow to regenerate the marine ground. Another example of how same technology can be used in very different ways is these two exoskeletons. That in this picture, they might look exactly the same, but when we look up at the application that they have, one of them is used for medical purposes, the other one is used for military purposes. So it's incredibly important that when we focus on one technology, we are aware of the questions that it might raise. Looking at virtual technologies, this is something that is a technology that have been developed for quite a few decades. It's not new. What is new it's now that this technology is far more accessible than ever before. So we can buy like a virtual reality headset for just £300, and it's an incredible quality compared to what we've seen in the last in just a few years ago. And still, the technology is continuously evolving, and it can open new scenarios and new ways of interacting with others. What is important, once again, is like how we use it. This is another technology that is related to virtual reality, and it's allowing to enhance other senses. At the moment, the technology that we have, which are the virtual reality headset, allows to interact through our eyes, what we see, and also what we hear. In some cases also, like, we can speak and interact with other people, but there is like these other senses, like the tactile, like the sensorial tactile experience is still yet to be developed. And there is a few companies, a couple of them in particular, are developing technology to enhance and create a more spatial and sensorial experience that can allow us to like move from the kind of experiences that we have in the physical world into the virtual reality or the virtual worlds. So it can be a more accurate and a more developed experience than what we have today. And this technology is evolving like incredibly quick. So this is why it's important, and I always say that we try to like make the right question to technology. So we don't need to we're not catching up with technology, but technology is catching up with us. And in particular in the virtual world, it's important that we raise many questions that go into like the impact that it will have in society. because obviously like there is like a lot of speculation, financial speculation, economical speculation that might come out of this sector, and it's important that it's regulated in the right way. So and just like using as an example, like right now, like every country or every city, it's regulated by a local or a national government. Now we are taking the decision that will shape the future. If we decide to develop or to put all our effort, the moment we are buying a virtual reality headset by whatever brand, we are supporting that brand, and we are like basically enabling that company, which is a private company, to define how we are going to experience the virtual world, which in the future we will be spending equal time in the virtual than in the physical, or this is what is expected. So it's very important that we know where we are putting our time and our resources, because we will be now supporting this next generation of virtual experiences. And if we decide that Facebook or Google or Apple or whatever company is the one that we are going to invest on, they will become the mayors in a way of the world that we will inhabit in a few decades. And yeah, and there, as I mentioned before, there is like lots of like issues that are already raising in this so-called metaverse, like this news from just a few months ago. And also like many governments at the moment are already investing in the metaverse, and it's something that obviously have been accelerated due to COVID and the lack of human interaction. But this is also like for example in South Korea, Seoul wants to become completely contactless, and they are creating a metaverse platform that will allow people to like do all the like paperwork or like different like consultations or complaints that they want to do into the metaverse. So they don't have to go to a specific office and interacting with a human being. Which, if we extrapolate that into society and the way we connect with each other, it can be quite challenging and redefining the way we interact nowadays. So as Cedric Price, who was a very influential British architect operating in the 60s and 70s, said, technology is the answer, but what was the question? Obviously, there was a lot of irony and very typical British irony in this statement. So it is important that we make question, and they have been like this quote have been the driving force for the exhibition I opened at the Museum of the Future, where we are not just presenting technology, but we are questioning them, trying to invite people to answer whether like those technologies that are presented there might be like positive or negative, and we leave it open to them, because it depends on how we use those technologies that they might define a positive or a more negative future for them. And what is true is like when we go back a few decades, and this is a very good example, the movie Blade Runner, we were released in the early 80s, but it was set in 2019. We can see a city and different urban scenarios that are heavily relying on technologies. But because the movie was set 3 years ago now, we can see the difference between the city that it was presented and the one that we are living. Perhaps there is like something in common, and in like the high levels of pollution that we can see in those cities. So that was the element that was the most accurate in this representation of the future. So when we rely so much on technology, often we build futures that are not what we were promised. And this is something that it's important, that we cannot put all the effort on that, and there are like lots of decisions that should come from us as a society and from governments. But going back to the concept of the metaverse, this so-called metaverse, which is only like a 3-dimensional version of the internet, people are trying to define what this is, and it is still not clear. Because basically that will be if we imagine ourselves in the 70s, when there was like someone saying like this is the internet, and it had like lots of possibilities, but they didn't know what kind of possibilities it had. We are at this same moment in the definition of what the metaverse is. We know it's a 3D virtual world. It's something that is relying on on the mobile internet that we've been experiencing over the last couple of decades. But the possibility that it might have and the impact that it can have, it's still unknown. But what is important is that it's regulated and designed properly, so we don't fall into like certain scenarios that might be dangerous or not as optimistic as we expect them to be. And again, we keep seeing that in films. This is Ready Player One, that was released 4 years ago, and I find it like incredibly appealing, because here you can see already like how some of the technologies that I presented just now, like this haptic suit that you can wear along with your virtual reality glasses, can enable to create a more holistic experience in the virtual world that allow to transfer like some of the experiences that we have in the physical into the virtual. And as it happened in that film, there is a risk that these worlds that we are inhabiting are dominated by just a few companies. And in this case, there were like 2 companies. One that was like the good one and one that was the bad one. I know I'm gonna make any spoiler. But this is the whole point of the film. Like, people can create an avatar to inhabit those worlds. They are spending crazy amounts of money on creating bespoke versions of themselves in the virtual world. But the problem is that when it's regulated by only a single company, we are putting all our lives into them, and including our economic resources. This is not something that is part of the future. It's something that is already happening today. This speculation about the virtual world is already happening, and it's been happening for quite a few years. These are the Linden Homes, which were released in 2010. This is the second generation of them. And they were part of a video game called Second Life. And people could like buy different like architectures for inhabiting their virtual lives, or for defining their virtual life. Architecture that are like a very bad version of the architecture that we can inhabit today. So this is something that I always say to my students. It's incredibly important that when we are thinking about the future, and in particular in the virtual world, when we don't have the limitation of like gravity, basically, that you design those worlds with imagination and with creativity, so they can like present reality that are, I'm not gonna say better, but radically different to the reality that we have in the physical world. Because if we try to replicate the physical world, it's gonna be just like a bad copy of that. And it's quite interesting how they, in 2019, when they released the second generation of Linden Homes, they were presented using very similar languages than the one that are used in real estate, because obviously there is a massive speculation behind that, and they are selling the plots and the properties, and the price is increasing. There are now many different platforms in the metaverse. One of them is Superworld, where you can like buy in Ether different monuments, or architectural monuments, for very different prices, and it depends on like the often like there is a degree of speculation that I'm going to talk about NFTs in a minute, but at the beginning, the way it was measured, it was depending on the amount of hour that virtual graphic designers put on designing those, and that was the starting point of that. So labor, like physical labor, was like very directly translated into the value in these cryptocurrencies. And another example is Decentraland, which is a metaverse platform where at the minute, the minimum price per plot is £16,000, and the price per avatar for opening your own account is £250, which is, and looking at estimations in the next 10 years, these values are expected to increase by 30. This is, I put the sound off because it's quite horrible. And this is an NFT, the first NFT house that have been, or probably the most expensive one. I don't know. I don't think it's the first one. That it was sold a few months ago in the marketplace Super Rare. for 288 Ether, which is the equivalent of like around $500,000. When we look at the design of this space, which is designed as an experience according to the architect, we can see that the design or the architecture of it is incredibly poor. It comes with like a background sound experience produced by one of the members of Smashing Pumpkins. But we can look at like how like there is no value put into the design. It's just like pure speculation. Like it's a marketing strategy behind that, which can be incredibly worrying if the kind of experiences are not designed from an architectural point of view in the right way, that can present new scenarios that can be like radically different, because this is just a bad version of like a modernist building. Obviously, NFTs is something that is already attracting the interest of many auction houses and the art market. So that we have already opened a venue in the Central Land, the platform I mentioned before. And this is just like showing how much interest, economical interest is behind that, without like questioning the actual value of the works that are presented there. Which in most of the cases, it's interesting that they are based on blockchain technology, and the ownership of this work can be decentralized. But at the same time, when we look at like the actual work, in most of the cases, it's a very bad materialization of a digital artwork, that have been already in the market for probably over 40 years. Blockchain technology can be used for speculating, or it can be used to shift the value. And for those that are not familiar with cryptocurrencies or blockchain technology, it basically allows to create smart contracts, a smart contract that are not between two individuals or between an individual and a corporation or a company, but that are secured by a network of miners that secure the transaction. So if there is any kind of like glitch or like shortcut, or like someone want to hack this process, the whole system collapses. So it doesn't allow it to happen, which is something that can it can open like many doors for democratizing and making like all these transactions more secure. But the fact that this is creating the network, and it requires like this interconnection between the different miners, relies on like a massive increase on the kind of energy that is required for every single transaction, which has obviously an environmental impact that we all should be aware of when we talk about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. This is a project that I commissioned for the Museum of the Future and for the exhibition Tomorrow Today by Dark Matter Labs, which is basically using blockchain technology and these smart contracts in a different way. What it does is like the project is called the Free House, because it allows to shift the value from the land or like a specific property, whether it's physical or virtual, and putting it into the quality of the houses and the sustainability aspects of that, which obviously had an impact on our well-being. The more sustainable our house is, the more positive impact it will have on our health and on our well-being. So by creating a smart contract with the house, that is put where the value is put on those factors, we can eventually generate a free house, meaning that if we care more about the house and we increase those sustainability factors, eventually the energy that we are saving and what we are saving on the health bill, it will make the house to be free. And it's leaving aside all the speculation that can be on the land or the plot where the house is built. And this is experienced in the museum through a augmented reality application. And yeah, as I mentioned before, this is a very funny picture where Mark Zuckerberg is walking into the stage in a VR conference, and no one is noticing that he's walking into the stage, even if everybody was waiting there to see him. And the virtual reality and had the the potential to also, as I said at the beginning, alienating us from others and to have interaction from others. And even if there is like many, these are like the three different platforms from big companies that are being developed at the moment, where like the design of them is incredibly gamey, I would say. Like it's extremely basic, and also like it's turning like the interaction, it mostly focused on the work, on building new work environment rather than the social aspect that might come out of that. They are, what we can see in all these platforms, it's all these companies are like putting all their efforts into developing these interactions more and more between people, and leaving a little bit aside the spaces where those social interaction will be happening. There have been like many museums that are already have already like explore how those spaces in the virtual world might happen. This is one of the projects that I like the most. It's from 1999. At that time, the technology didn't allow for people to inhabit this space. It's a virtual version of the Guggenheim Museum by Asymptote, which is a practice based in New York. And there they were like looking at like what the type of program that should be included in these spaces, and what will be like an architecture that will be like radically different than the architecture that is currently hosting the museum, that could eventually, whenever the technology, now we are closer to that technology, people could like inhabit and like interact within. Based on these two premises, a couple of years ago, I was invited to curate the Archaea Festival, which is a festival that was often happening, well, it was until then happening in a different city, whether in Spain or Portugal, and inviting different young architects to participate. And basically the format was a series of talks and debates happening in a different city every 2 years, and people like gathering and exchanging ideas. Unfortunately, due to COVID, the project that was supposed to happen in Barcelona was canceled. And instead of doing a traditional, like what is now a traditional Zoom conference, we decided to take this as an opportunity, given that it was a festival for architects, to design a space that could host the conference. So we invited the Space Popular, which is a practice-based, well, I don't know where they are based now. Now they are in Los Angeles, but like moving all the time, to design a platform that could allow us to host the conference and the debates, but also a space for, and this is the result, this is the main arena, but also a space where we could like host like different exhibitions and even a screening room. What it was like most important about this platform, it wasn't only the design that was very carefully like designed and curated to make the navigation through the space very easy, so there is no glitches that you end up between two walls and stuck like running into a wall. That was something on a practical level, that it was very physical for making like the navigation very easy and the user experience. But what it was more important is that we could like translate that experience of the physical world into the virtual platform, meaning we wanted people to be able to talk to each other. So there could be, so we could like bring this social factor into the platform. So people could, the platform was programmed in a way that when you were like getting close to another avatar, you could like speak to that person as if you would be on the street, and you just approach someone and talk to that person. And when you're getting farther, you don't listen to that person, or like that conversation that three avatars were having together. So that created like this kind of experience. There were like a ceremony also where some students were awarded, and each one of the gallery was designed radically different, and all inspired by the urbanism or the grid of Barcelona. We created, and it was, all the exhibitions were linear to make the navigation very easy, but there were like still like pods where like people could like stop and talk to each other and discuss about one of the projects that they were both looking at through their screens. The platform could be navigated through laptops or through headsets. And yeah, and the result was incredibly positive, because this festival that was initially conceived to happen in Barcelona was now open to everyone in the world who wanted to attend and to visit the platform. This is another project, and I know, Oli, I'm speaking too much. I'm gonna try to like be quick.
Oh, you're good. We've got a couple of minutes. You're good.
Couple of minutes. Wow. I can't go through. And this is another project that I commissioned for the Royal Academy. It was a physical installation by the architect Jill Retzin. It was part of an exhibition called Invisible Landscapes. And the whole structure was designed using HoloLens and augmented reality. So this structure was like just like a model of a much larger virtual structure that was like conquering the whole museum. And augmented reality and with the HoloLens, they could like assemble them incredibly quick. And I'm gonna run through this, but you can see like how it was. Here you can see how it was assembled using augmented reality. So it was like almost like a Lego, and it was incredibly easy because like through the augmented reality headset, they were like getting instruction of how to assemble every piece and telling them exactly where it should be assembled. Another project that part of Invisible Landscape was this mixed reality experience where Softbody, the designer behind the installation, created these physical objects and that were spread across the room, and people using a headset could interact with them. And those object will become something completely different in the virtual world. In the same way that certain element, like this fireplace that was in the room, turned into a door that people could go through. So it allowed to like a physical reality that it was like the gallery where this was held, turn into like multiple other realities that they could inhabit, almost as if it would be a video game, allowing to question ideas of ornament and interaction between the physical and the virtual world. These doors that the virtual world can open are incredibly important to imagine new realities. This is still from a film that Liam Young had created for Tomorrow Today at the Museum of the Future, a film called Feeding 10 Billion, where he's imagining like through these CGI visuals how our city might be transformed when in a very complex world that we might be facing in 30 years, when we will be 10 billion and the food production will need to move into the cities in order to minimize the carbon emissions and the environmental impact that food production will have. But also this is a project included in the exhibition I curated at the Royal Academy Co-Visionaries. These virtual technology can allow us to imagine reality that are no longer existing, like bringing back to life this white rhino called Sudan, which died 4 years ago now. And that it had become extinct, even if there is only like 2 females still on Earth. The last male died 4 years ago. And through virtual technologies, we can like recreate this rhino, but which is also like opening questions around whether like we are putting too much effort on developing new technologies and we are missing or forgetting about other realities and the natural world on the way. And when looking at the impact of these virtual technologies, we shouldn't forget about the physical reality that is behind them. These rather beautiful views of server farms, which is an architecture purely designed to shelter non-humans, non-human meaning technology, is now happening all over the world. And even if they are, we could like define them as sublime, and the kind of like sublime dimension of technology, the reality is that there is a complexity behind that we can barely understand, and it's a complexity that comes out of the environmental impact that our virtual and digital life has on the physical world. I'm gonna almost like close and just like a few slides more. This is a project also by Liam Young as part of Unknown Fields, the practice he had with Katie Davis, where he looks at the natural landscape that are being radically transformed by a company like Tesla, that are promising a future completely relying on lithium batteries. And lithium is a rare mineral that is being extracted from countries like Bolivia or Argentina or Chile, where the largest reserves are located today. And they are acquiring lots of land there and radically transforming and extracting in a very aggressive way those landscapes without taking in consideration not just the impact that they are having on those environments, but also on the people that are living out of like this and the anthropological meaning that it has for the people that inhabit these territories. Even if the future will be fully electric, we need to look at like where is that electricity coming from, how can we make this more sustainable and potentially reducing our demand, and what is like the infrastructure that is necessary for that virtual life. And yeah, like these are a few figures. Today, the atmospheric CO2 levels are 50% higher than before the first industrial revolution. And this is expected to increase by 20% in the next 10 years. Even if we keep seeing the COP26 and 27 and 28, we keep seeing the politicians signing paper for reducing carbon emissions. This is not yet happening. And we are supposed to reduce by 50% our carbon emission in the next 10 years. However, the estimations are that it will increase by 20. And a big chunk of this is being used currently by information and communication technology, which include this virtual life that I presented before. And I'm just gonna close with this. Is the Garden of Early Delight by Hieronymus Bosch. Many of you might not know that when this very famous triptych, which is often associated with climate change, it's closed, it presents this dome that is protecting this till then flat wall. And this, we could like build a metaphor with the situation that we are living today. This dome, it might be the technology that we are all relying on. However, it's all about the reality that we are experiencing under that dome and the decision that we are taking, that we can build an optimistic future, that it might be relying on high advanced technologies or not. We live in a rendered reality shaped by global complexity that we can barely understand, empathize with, or respond to. Virtual technologies have the power to support this transition from speculation to realization, to build a more optimistic future. But it is up to governments, corporations, and every one of us to make a change. And now I'm gonna throw just like a couple of slides as a provocation, because I know like people might want to talk about like what is the impact on the museums and the cultural sector beyond just the project I explained. This is the kind of reality that we are living when we talk about virtual life in the cultural sector, are literal replicas or reproduction of the building that we are experiencing in museums. To be honest, I'd rather go into a museum, visiting it by myself, seeing the brush stroke on the painting rather than seeing it here. It's true that it can democratize and open the door to like many people to making arts and culture more accessible and global. But it also had the risk that we end up in this kind of virtual experiences that we are seeing now more and more in the museum, where we are feeling completely isolated and alienated from each other. And the future, as I said, is not just virtual, but as I present in Tomorrow Today, the exhibition at the Museum of the Future is also about low technologies and looking back into like those technologies that might present a more sustainable and ecologically minded future for all. Thank you, everyone. And that's all from me. Wow, it was 40 minutes. It wasn't bad.
Thank you. No, that was great. Far out. There's a lot there.
I wasn't scared about it.
Oh, no, don't be scared. I'm quite amazed, though, that here we are in the year 2022, and the aesthetics of the digital realm, though, are so of the early 2000s.
Yeah,
it's kind of interesting. You made this point on a couple of times, but this idea that we're sort of designing realities that are actually just bad reproductions of our current reality, and with all of the possibilities of the virtual realm, why didn't we think to have architecture that doesn't have gravity, or spaces that don't require, a door frame, that can move beyond our physical bodies? Why would we then inhabit the digital realm with new avatars of physical bodies?
Yeah, no, I mean, like the thing is that like when we look at gaming, for example, technology, this is something that it's incredibly inspiring. We can see like how designers that are currently working in gaming, they are like breaking boundaries, and the kind of scenarios and like world that you inhabit there are radically different, and they are looking at the experience and like that you as a user or as a gamer are navigating and trying to make it radically different from the reality of the physical world. But this is possible because the hardware that is enabling that allow that for happening. When you are not interacting with other people and basically you are not connected to the internet and everything not relying on a server, but you have a video game in a PlayStation or whatever game you're using, that allow for more creative freedom. For example, when we were doing the virtual festival, we were facing a lot of challenges. If you want to create a navigation that it's very easy and like that there is no glitches, and you want also like people to interact with each other, the data is loading the band like incredibly. The more detail you include in it, and like the more sophisticated the spaces you create. So at the moment, like we can like imagine those very visionary and futuristic scenario, but the technology is not yet there. And that is the problem. But it's important that we start like thinking about the virtual scenario with creativity and innovation, and not trying to rely on like doing bad replicas of the physical world. And this is what has been happening. I saw the example of the Linden Homes in Second Life, that is 12 years ago. And when we look at what Meta or like all these big tech corporations are doing today, it's not very far from there. So it's been like 12 years and they are still like doing the same kind of bad architecture. So this is why I always encourage architects to like be part of like an active part of like the design of these spaces. Because
I mean, I played The Sims in about the year 2004, and I feel it was exactly the same aesthetic.
It's exactly the same, yeah. It's exactly the same, and you don't see yet, unless it's in a movie like Ready Player One or like many other movies, but you don't see like the actual platform that you can navigate are very different from pretty much like 20 years ago. So there is a scope there for designing them in a way that it could present new realities.
So can we just talk aesthetics for a moment? Because, and I hate to boil down, the arts realm into aesthetics, but it is a topic which comes up again and again. In terms of the aesthetic decision-making behind the kind of virtual realm that exists at the current phase, you use that term gamer, and you're a bit unsure about how to say it. And it's an interesting term because it's a term that is often quite gendered, although that is a myth, but it is a term that is often affiliated then with this sort of the tech bros, or it's a very mask kind of aesthetic. And I must say there are certain elements of this which do have a certain gendered feel to them, especially that image you had of all of these men in VR sets with Zuckerberg walking into the theatre, and you go, these gendered spaces. Do you feel that gender is something, or is a conversation point at the moment within this topic?
No, definitely. I mean, like the tech industry have been like very male dominated for many decades. I think that is like changing quite radically when you look at the figures of like the Nooglers and the like people joining Google and all these tech companies today. It's quite different. I mean, it's quite different, and it's becoming more and more balanced, which hopefully like when it goes into like designing those virtual spaces, will create like very different aesthetics in just a few years. That is the good thing about like this design of these virtual worlds. It's like the technology is taking a little bit of time, but the design is incredibly quick if we compare it with the physical world. So the fact that now like it's a far more balanced industry in terms of gender, it will the impact of that will be like noticeable, and like we will be able to see it in just a few years. So I think it's incredibly promising. It's very important that what you are saying about like we're like the aesthetic that we are defining there, but on the other hand, like there is like lots of like platforms, for example Mozilla Hubs, which is open source platform that it allows to anyone to design walls within that space. So there is also what is important, that the way those platforms are regulated, it's open source, whether possible, and that will be more inviting for different people and very different voices from very different backgrounds to design those spaces and having a voice there and feel represented within those spaces, which is something that in the physical world obviously will take far more time and completely different resources at the moment.
We're in conversation with Gonzalo Herrero Delicado. I encourage anyone in attendance to jump into the chat if you've got any questions. We've got about 12 minutes left. I did want to come back to a point, Gonzalo, that you made right at the beginning there in regards to, I suppose, the way that the digital realm is currently being governed by corporations or by private entities. And in some ways, they exist as the mayors of these places that we inhabit. They dictate how they function. And so do you feel that we're a bit slow currently in creating laws around the digital realm, or do you feel like we're at a good pace?
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like we're already late. What you are seeing in terms of like the economic speculation that is already happening there in platform like Decentraland, which is supposed to be like the most one of the more open platform there, because it's not regulated by any of the big corporation. Like the speculation that is in terms of that is happening already in terms of the value of the land it's astronomical. But that is one of the good ones. So I cannot imagine what is going to happen, like when Apple, for example, release their new headset in, I think like they're going to do it in a few months. The kind of a scenario that can present and putting all the power into like this corporation, it can be incredibly risky. And it's important, and there is zero regulation at the moment in that sense. I mean, in the same way that there is like very little regulation now happening in the internet. And this I go back to the beginning of the metaverse is just like an extension or a three-dimensional experience of the internet. This is where it's gonna be. So yeah, if the internet doesn't have it, like it's gonna be more difficult to define it now into this unless it's happening right now.
Yeah, which for me is so bizarre, why there would be speculation for what is actually an infinite resource. It's not a finite resource like land in your favorite neighborhood is, or yeah, exactly, like certain resources out of a particular mine. We're talking about this online reality that it can be as big and expansive as we want to make it. So the fact that there's a sort of speculation on it is sort of absurd. Bringing this back into the contemporary art scene though, and I know NFT is it's the hit word of the last 2 years, but it is a term that a lot of people are finding quite confusing. And it is something that you brought up again with this idea of having actual landmarks that could be then sold in this online world. It's a term that I've come across as being minting, that you would mint then these existing objects, whether they be an artwork or they be a piece of architecture, and you would mint them onto this as an NFT. Is speculation on those kind of things worthy? Do you feel like it's something that we should be engaging in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting phenomenon that is happening today, but it's if we focus on the works themselves, I find incredibly, like for example, like a few months ago when like I think it was Sotheby's sold this NFT for like I don't remember how many millions. And what I find interesting is that now we are finally giving value to digital art works. And that was only a mere example, like what happened at Sotheby's with this NFT that sold for like, I don't know how many millions. But, and that is important because it's a form of art that is needed and required to have that value and consolidation within the art world. That is one aspect. But then like when we look at the whole point of the NFTs is about the ownership of the artwork. I find it like incredibly stupid, but that might be like a personal thing because it merely focused on the financial and economical speculation of that. So if we focus the art world into the financial speculation, we are not talking about the art. We are talking about like the money that can generate, and that have been like incredibly problematic in the art sector. When people start buying cows or reproduction of Banksy's or even a Damien Hirst, it becomes like something that the value is not on that. It's just on a signature. Whether it's digital or it's physical, it doesn't matter. but we are not like questioning whether the art that is being created through these platforms or enabled through this technology is good or not. And when financial speculation comes into play, then that can be extremely dangerous for the general public to understand what is good art and what is not. It's all about just the ownership of it. And there is like a lot of, like, as I mentioned in the lecture, like there is lots of digital artworks. Digital art have been there for like the last few decades, and it was incredibly good. Like it was like underrated, and now it's having like a new momentum, and that is positive. But it has already been there, like taking a GIF and turning it into an NFT and selling it for like 3 million. It had good and bad sides. Let's try to focus on the good side and like understanding that this is a new form of art and it's a phenomenon. Let's not focus on like the value that generates, because the mining and the cryptocurrency, they have an expiry date, and there is they have a period and when we won't be able to like mine more, and there is not like a kind of like pot that we can like create and generate more cryptocurrencies. There is a moment that is gonna collapse per se. So the value will start like going down. And as I said before, also it's relying on very physical resources. People that are mining them in areas like remote area of Russia, where they are being paid nothing for doing that work, but it's still relying on an incredible need of energy that is required for like running those servers that are supporting those transactions.
And human labor. And so in some ways, all we did through creating this wonderful virtual online world is we kind of are highlighting all the worst aspects of capitalism. Exploitation of the nature, exploitation of the worker, exploitation of the artwork, exploitation of the art world, and all of those really quite horrendous things that have really scarred our global society seem to be sort of replicated on the internet now. How do you feel that digital art can kind of recover from this rocky beginning then?
Well, I don't know. Like, I mean, it's incredibly difficult to predict what is going to happen in the next few decades with the digital art. I think it's opening the door for many people to explore that field, and for many artists and future artists to see an opportunity there to develop art in a different medium, and that is promising. I don't think that relying on cryptocurrencies is in the future, even if we have like Ether and some other cryptocurrency that are being more sustainable or environmentally friendly. People keep investing on that, and I think that is something that maybe just like me, hoping that it will collapse at some point and it will be just a hype. But what I think is like it's important that it's giving credibility to this form of art that didn't have before, and hopefully that will continue increasing, and artists will start operating with this new technology, digital technologies and virtual technologies in more creative way that allow us to look at the world around us with completely different eyes. And that is optimistic. The speculation behind that, I think it's intrinsic in the art world, and it's something that it's unavoidable. Now there is just like a new form that is through NFTs, but probably there will be another one in the future. I mean, that is what happened with technology. We don't know where it's gonna take us. What is important is that we know where we put the value, and in this case, it should be in the works themselves and not on the speculative value or financial value that it might generate in the future.
Definitely. I want to talk, this is our last question for our talk today. I want to come back to something that you said about the democratized access to museums and collections through virtual reality. And keeping in mind where we're coming from, the sort of the new world of digital art and the platforms which they're currently being displayed in, and sort of, I guess, the old world of museum collections housed within institutions and displayed in exhibitions. Where can these two meet, and in what capacity?
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting point. I always say, like, for example, like the work that Google Arts and Culture are doing in collaboration with museums, it's incredibly important because they are opening those collections that often are in Western countries and like limited to those people that can afford to travel to those museums, whether like the Louvre or the British Museum, to get access to these works and these forms and this art. With these platforms, which are very basic forms of metaverse, in the sense that it's just like literally like a scanning of a room. That is allowing many more people that are coming from the opposite corner of the world to like learn from those collections, and that is incredibly important, the work that is being done in that sense. What is true is like for museums, I think they need to start embracing more what are like these the new forms of developing virtual art and virtual experiences, which at the moment obviously come with like lots of like constraints. I mean, for example, at the Museum of the Future, which is the Museum of the Future, and it's true, everybody's expecting that if, for example, in my exhibition, there will be like a virtual reality experience. There is none because of a very practical thing. Like, museums now are cultural destinations, and they require, and they are expecting like thousands of people to go through the door every day. the virtual experiences, in particular during COVID, have been like incredibly badly affected, because you need to sanitize everything, and there is like glitch. The technology is there, but like there is always that glitch, and there is something that not working. The computer is broken. That you need to reboot the computer. So it doesn't allow those experiences to happen. So the only way, I mean, for example, we were exploring at some point doing this haptic experience with the haptic suit. So like it's the extreme of the virtual reality experience, so you can like feel it across your body. After trying like different format, we realized that we couldn't do it, because basically like you need to sanitize a suit. It takes 20 minutes to sanitize, and then like if you want to create like this kind of immersive experience with this kind of suits, it doesn't work in every single context. It requires people to remove their clothes and to put that suit on. So still, like, I mean, I think there is like a lot of potential on that. We just need to wait for the technology to be ready there. And it looks like it's ready, but it's not ready.
Yeah, and it's that thing that the reality of virtual reality is still restricted by the reality of our physical being. We haven't got to that place.
Yeah.
Gonzalo, we're out of time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk today. And thank you to all of our attendees as well. As I said at the beginning, this talk will be uploaded to the MISC Art Institute YouTube account. And I hope to see you next month for our 4th virtual talk. Again, thank you, Gonzalo. And I look forward to seeing more from you in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Oliver. And thank you, the MISC Institute, for inviting me to be part of this and opening the discussion about what the virtual will be and what the metaverse what will be the impact that it will have on all of us. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I hope that people enjoy, and see you very soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye.